Welcome to another edition of Lakeville City Council Wrap-Up. During this program, we will highlight the agenda items presented to the Lakeville City Council at their October 7th, 2013 meeting. First highlighted item on the agenda is item number 5D, Public Works Department Monthly Report. And to give the background information on this agenda item is Public Works Director Chris Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. My pleasure to be here again this evening presenting the September 2013 monthly report for the Public Works Department. And as we've done the last couple of months, we'll highlight major construction projects in the city for a majority of the report. As you all know, and we've already talked about it earlier in the meeting, currently I-35 is single lane in both directions from County Road 2 all the way up to County Road 50. They're moved to the same side of the interstate, which is currently on the west side in each direction. That's single lane. Also, that causes the 185th Street ramps to northbound I-35, again, as we talked about already, to be closed, as well as the northbound exit ramp to County Road 50. These and other temporary ramp closures, as well as switching the traffic to the east side of the interstate, will occur within the project area through November as the repairs are completed. The objective of the project is to improve, of course, the travel lanes, shoulders, ramps, and bridges along I-35 between Elko and Lakeville. Of course, the project also extended into Egan up to Cliff Road, but that work was completed earlier in the summer. One outcome also that's currently being worked on is for the extended acceleration lane, and you can see that on the slide in front of you in the picture in the middle. An extended acceleration lane from County Road 50 northbound ramp onto I-35. This should help to improve traffic flow in that area. For additional information or updates, we'd encourage everyone to visit the city's website, and we have a link to the MnDOT website that has a special web page just for this project. And of course, like I said, you can find it on the city's website or by going to MnDOT's website and looking at the I-35E improvement page. Moving on, other major construction projects, of course, as you all know, we're approaching later this week. It'll be 2 weeks that the Dodd Highview Avenue roundabout project was completed and open to traffic. The final paving was completed on September 23rd and 24th, with landscaping restoration and striping occurring in the following days, and then it was open to traffic later that week. Continuing on with major construction projects, our street reconstruction projects are moving along, and Valley Park is nearing completion. As you would all recall, that was split into 2 phases, and both phases have the initial base course of asphalt, and we're working to complete all the restoration work in those areas currently. In Clay's Acres, work is ongoing to complete the curb and gutter installation, which it is complete. New storm sewer has been installed, as well as drain tile services to all the property owners to deal with some of the drainage issues that have occurred in Clay's Acres over the years. Lastly, curb and gutter was installed last week along 204th Street, our last phase of this year's street reconstruction project, and it is scheduled to be completed by the end of October or early November. Moving on, major construction projects, the 168th Street Bridge replacement project. If you recall from last month's presentation, I showed a slide and we were still working on ripping out the old abutments and putting in pilings to support the new bridge. That's all been completed, and you can see the new abutments that are here. This is the last part of our 2012 street reconstruction project. So we're going back a year. If you recall, we received some state bridge bond funding to pay for this project, but we had to complete it in 2013. So we're almost done with this bridge project over North Creek at 168th Street in Gannon. The last piece of the puzzle is to complete the new bridge deck, and that work is actually going on this week. We expect to have the bridge completed by the week of October 21st. Now moving on past some of our major construction projects, and just wanted to provide the council a little update of some other work we have going on. And so frequently we talk about large, noteworthy situations, water main breaks as it relates to our water system. However, there are smaller but just as important repairs that our crews do as well to the system, and one of those is a replacement, as simple as it may sound, is bolts on gate valves or water valves. Occasionally water will come up to the surface. If you're driving around, you might see it coming out of one of these gate valves to the surface, and sometimes it can be from groundwater or other things, but unfortunately more often than not it's from an actual failure of the valve or the bolts, and you can see it in the upper left hand corner photo, failing on the top of a gate valve. Unfortunately, the city's had problems with our valves that we have, and we have well over 4,000 of these valves in our water system. Where the bolts, because of corrosive soils, will corrode away and the valve will actually begin to leak or weep, and it will come to the surface. So the remedy for this is our crews excavate around the valves, replace the old bolts with new stainless steel bolts, which are now the current specification, and we're back in business without having to replace the valve in its entirety. The next slide here is storm sewer maintenance. Of course, installation of storm sewers and catch basins is far from an exact science. Of course, the engineering and placement of the pipe is done to a specified standard. However, once they are actually constructed, the weak spot is typically where the water enters the catch basins at the curb. Of course, once the pipe and catch basin structure are installed, the structure has to be brought up to grade so that can be paved around and then the curb can be poured around it. And when this is done, concrete rings of varying thicknesses are placed on top of one another, and then it's manually grouted in, and those rings are grouted in. Well, over time, of course, these rings shift, the grouting breaks, and what ends up happening is you'll see small sinkholes, and it's very common if you drive by catch basins along the road that you might see a depression or a sinkhole, and that's because of those failing rings that are around the catch basins. So our streets division crews, as pictured in these slides, are out on a regular basis repairing these catch basins and the resulting sinkholes. Once the catch basin's been repaired, the affected areas of asphalt are cut out and new asphalt is put down. You can see that after a repair was made on that particular catch basin, the crews are out and patching around it. In some cases, of course, once sinkholes have been patched, asphalt is placed around the patches to correct the slope for the grade and inconsistencies that may be caused by the damaged catch basin. Now, the last few slides, it is in the end of our third quarter, so I'll talk about water use. Water use to date is 1.865 billion gallons through September. That's compared to our 10-year average of about 1.93 billion gallons through the third quarter, so about 3.5% less than our 10-year average. Monthly water use, you can see the 10-year average we easily surpassed in both August and September due to the dry conditions. Monthly water use crept up in those 2 months in excess of 400 million gallons in August and over 350 million gallons in September. Of course, again, this is indicative of the dry conditions that we've experienced over the last couple of months, short of this past weekend. Water use per person, always a good gauge as to where we're at and what impacts irrigation has. Our per capita water use for the third quarter, so July, August, and September, ranged between 200 and 230 gallons per capita per day or per person per day. It does, like I mentioned already, truly show the impact of irrigation that we have. If you take a look back to the first quarter, so January, February, and March, our average per capita per day water use was between 53 and 60 gallons per day. So now it spikes to 200 to 230. So truly an indication of the impacts of irrigation on water use in our community. And the last slide, average and peak day. Our peak day use was actually in September this year and was 17.05 million gallons, a little short of what our peak has been that we've reached in the past. Last year it was a little over 19 million gallons, so a little less this year, but still very strong numbers for August and September with peak use. And you can see the line below is our average daily use, so you can see how much that separates as you go into the summer months, what an average day would be considered, and when we get to some of the peaking factors and peak times. That does conclude the monthly report for September 2013. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 7, public hearing on the certification of delinquent utility accounts. And to provide the background information on this agenda item is Finance Director Dennis Feller.
Before you is a resolution certifying delinquent accounts to the County Auditor Treasurer. In addition to the amounts which are delinquent, it includes a $35 administrative fee and interest at the rate of 18% per year. The total amount that's before you right now is $300,772. By approving this resolution, the delinquent accounts will be certified to the Dakota County Auditor to be collected with the 2014 taxes.
Item number 7 was approved by the Lakeville City Council. Next highlighted item on the agenda is item number 8, resolution of support for Dakota County Highway 50 corridor study. And to begin a series of presentations, once again, here's Public Works Director Chris Petrie.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you indicated tonight, we're asking the council for a resolution of support for the Dakota County Highway 50 corridor study. Just as a way of introduction, I'm going to give a little bit of background as to why we're here this evening, as well as talk about the process. Then our Assistant County Engineer, Mr. Brian Sorensen, will speak to you about some of the recommendations of the corridor study. And we'll be happy to answer any questions after that point in time. But first of all, talking about background and kind of the objectives of the study. As we look back to a little over a year ago, both the staff and the county were asked by the City Council to look at the impacts of the proposed roundabout at County Road 50 and 60 or 185th and Kenwood Trail that was proposed to be constructed in 2014 and 15. And then ultimately from that, as well with this corridor study, to look at the short and the long-term recommendations or needs for County Road 50. And we show it on the map here just so everyone's clear. It's from County Road 60 or 185th Street down to County Road 9 or Dodd Boulevard. That's the extent of the corridor study. So those were the objectives, and that's a little bit of the background. Now, process. If we take a look at the timeline over the past just a little over a year, neighborhood meetings were held beginning last November, so November of 2012. There were 4 different neighborhood meetings that were held on 2 nights. We focused dealing with different areas, different neighborhoods, the Jaguar Avenue neighborhood, as well as, of course, businesses that were affected as part of this particular corridor. Following those neighborhood meetings and getting that input from all of the different stakeholders, our consultant then went forward and did modeling, did different data and scenarios captured all of the data and then ran different scenarios with their modeling. And that occurred from December through January of 2013. Then we followed up and met with business owners, specifically the business owners between Ipava and Dodd Boulevard, those businesses that are on the north side of County Road 50 or Kenwood Trail. And that was done in February, as well as we had meetings specifically with school district officials and the Kenwood Trail Middle School representatives around that same point in time. We came back to the City Council then with the consultant as well as county staff to a work session in February to present some of the initial findings, and then ultimately had an open house. This open house happened to be at Kenwood Trail Middle School, and that was in March, where we presented some of the initial findings of the corridor study and took additional feedback. Lastly, we met with school board officials in June to inform them of the results of the corridor study. We met them at a school board workshop or board meeting. And lastly, the consultant went forward and wrote the final report in August, which we presented to the council at a work session in September. The initial findings took some of that feedback back as we drafted the resolution that's before you this evening. And of course, during that same period in time after after August and through today, county representatives, Mr. Sorensen, had interaction with the business owners along County Road 50 during this same time to be able to share some of the results of the corridor study with them. So with that, I'll ask Mr. Sorensen to come up, and he'll talk about the recommendations of the corridor study with you.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. Happy to be here tonight to go through the recommendations of study. As Chris explained, this has been a pretty long and involved process, maybe even a little longer than we anticipated when we started, but I think the resolution here is one that gives us a lot of insight on where we need to go from here regarding the Kenwood Trail corridor. So I won't reiterate any of the process that Chris talked about, but I do want to mention that Chris mentioned the model. And what we did here was a little bit unique, and what we heard from the residents here was a question about gapping. I mean, it was a point of a lot of discussion a year ago, August, September, I want to say. And we heard a lot about what is the roundabout going to do to the gaps along the 50 corridor. And so we spent a lot of time developing a detailed model that would replicate what we see out there today. So we took video of what's going on out there today and set up the model to replicate that. And then we ran 6 different scenarios with the model. We were looking at a potential roundabout at 185th Street. We also compared it against what if we would have gone with a signal at 185th, and compared those results. Other scenarios include adjustments on traffic control in the corridor. We looked at what would happen if we added a signal at 192nd Street, which is also the North Kenwood Trail Middle School access. And then we also looked long-term. I think we all know that there's going to be a lot more growth in Lakeville and the surrounding areas that are going to affect the volumes along Kenwood Trail. So one of those scenarios looked at what is going to happen along the corridor if we go to 4 lanes. So with that, I will jump into the conclusions and recommendations. The main conclusions of the study were the intersection at 50 and 60, and whether it's roundabout or signal, does affect the way that gaps occur along the corridor for traffic that wants to access Kenwood Trail. It does change the nature of those gaps, and I think what we heard from people saying, well, signals create platoons of traffic and roundabouts don't do that to the same extent. That's true, and the model played that out. However, what we did see is that it did not affect the delays that people experience. So the delays that people experience with a signal at 185th instead of a roundabout at 185th were very similar. It did depend on the distance the intersection was from the roundabout, but overall, what is determining the delays along the corridor is mainly the volume of traffic along the corridor. So as volumes increase over time, that has a bigger effect on the delays on the corridor than does the intersection control at 185th Street. That was one of the main conclusions. I mentioned we also looked at adding a signal at 192nd. Although a signal there could reduce the delays right at that intersection, it really did not reduce the delays up and down the corridor for any of the other intersections to Kenwood Trail. As I've already alluded to, one of the main results is the way to reduce delays along the corridor. The best way to reduce the delays is to expand the road to 4 lanes. That was definitely a clear result of the study. And as I've also alluded to, we need to go to 4 lanes at some point in the future. City has a 20-year plan for growth. The county has a 20-year transportation plan that reflects the growth of the communities in the county. And when we look at those volumes upwards, I think our projection on the north ends is close to 27,000 cars a day. When you're at those volumes, you can't move that amount of traffic with 2 through lanes. You do need 4 through lanes. So we know at some point the corridor does need to go to 4 lanes. We did, as part of the conclusions and the study, we did develop an access plan for the corridor. And just a couple highlights from that access plan. One of the integral parts of the study was the Kenwood Trail Middle School. And of course, they are affected directly by the operations along Kenwood Trail every day. Our recommendation as part of the access plan is to leave their 2 accesses to Kenwood Trail as is. The access plan does have long-term recommendations for if we do run into issues with delays or crashes. There could be adjustments. So, for example, at 192nd Street, if we hit the volumes and type of traffic conditions where we're starting to have issues, that would be a logical location for a signal. So not a short-term recommendation for a signal, but potentially a long-term recommendation. We are recommending a 3/4 access at Icenic, which is about a little over 500 feet from Dodd Boulevard. Very close to the signalized intersection there, and as we look at the long-term volumes, reducing the left out becomes a very important safety feature. So 3/4 meaning you can left onto Icenic if you're coming south on 50, but you would not be able to make a left out and go towards Dodd. And we also have a recommendation for a 3/4 intersection between Ipava and Icenic. If and when we do move forward with a 4-lane divided roadway in this area, it does change the nature of access for the businesses between Ipava and Icenic. And there also is some developable area along that corridor. So with the spacing there, we believe we should look much more closely at whether there's potential for a 3/4 access when we move forward with a 4-lane project. So jumping to the recommendations. First, we're recommending we move forward with the 50 and 60 roundabout. Secondly, we did at the March open house receive a couple comments from the Jaguar neighborhood, maybe questions saying, well, what if we widened the approach to 50 so that if you're making a right, you don't have to sit behind everybody making a left? And that actually could reduce the delays for people making lefts as well. And with a little bit of analysis, we agreed that that would be a good thing to help reduce delays at Jaguar now. So there is a project actually already under construction at Jaguar just to widen out the approach a little bit and give 2 approach lanes. That was one of the recommendations of the study, and we wanted to get moving forward with that as soon as possible. And then one of the recommendations is to conduct a follow-up gap study once the roundabout is built. So, we developed the model, we tried to replicate the existing conditions as best we can. We used the model to help us predict what we think is going to happen along the corridor. But ultimately, we'd like to know how accurately the model did predict what was going to happen along the corridor with the roundabout in place. So once the roundabout is constructed and operational, we will go back out and do a study to assess how well the model, in essence, predicted what was going to happen. As I've mentioned, 4-lane is the best way to reduce the delays along the corridor. So one of the main recommendations of the study is to consider 4-lane expansion of County Highway 50. And I know there's been discussion between city and county staff at this point of including in our draft capital improvement programs a project that would reconstruct County Road 50 to a 4-lane road in 2017. That's subject to council approval of your CIP and Dakota County Board approval of the county CIP. That said, we recognize, we've heard directly from business owners between Ipava and Icenic that a project there would have direct impacts to them with the proximity of the businesses to the corridor. One of the challenges we have with expanding Kenwood to 4 lanes is along the south end, we've got railroad that runs right next to the roadway. And we did actually interact with Canadian Pacific to see if there was any potential for acquiring the corridor. They're not interested in selling. So if we move forward with a project here in the next few years, we're going to have to work around that corridor, which means any expansion of the road is going to have to head the other way. So we do acknowledge in the recommendations that as design moves forward, the right-of-way impacts with those businesses should be examined in more detail. Long-term, one of the issues along the corridor is, that pertains to the Jaguar neighborhood is there's only one access in and out of that neighborhood. And so part of the study recommendations is to recommend that there be a second connection made that would eventually connect out to IPAVA and allow those residents to use the signal at IPAVA to access Kenwood Trail as well. And then finally, I mentioned the access plan. So we're recommending with the improvements that we follow the access plan. So with that, that's a summary of the conclusions and recommendations. I just want to say thank you to the council. The council had to sit through 3 workshops of me talking about gaps and delays and models, and I appreciate your patience with that. Really want to thank Administrator Milkey, Chris Petrie, Zach Johnson. Chris and Zach were very involved with the study. When we were out there meeting with business owners and with the school, they were there too. And it does make a difference when the city and county are working together on trying to find solutions on a corridor like this. So just wanted to iterate a thank you to the city, to the council, and to the staff for your support of the study process.
Item number 8 was accepted by the Lakeville City Council. Well, those were the highlighted items presented to the council at their October 7th, 2013 meeting. If you have any questions or comments regarding these agenda items, please feel free to call City Hall. The number is 952-985-4400. Thanks for watching this edition of Lakeville City Council Wrap-Up. The curtain is going up for this year's season at the Lakeville Area Performing Arts Center. And this year, there's something for everyone. From a wide array of musical stylings to holiday seasonal performances, the Lakeville Area Arts Center offers the finest in regional entertainment. New this season, reserve seating for all performances. To find program descriptions and buy tickets online, visit our new website at www.lakevilleareaartscenter.com.